We are live. Hey guys, thanks for joining the fourth Lonely Coders web prez. Today we are talking with Michael Keller from Jazeera America. He's going to be talking to us about NodeJS data tools like Indian Ocean. Similar is CSV Kit for Python, but this will be using Node.js. So I'll let him talk more about it.
Hello, thanks, Ali. So yeah, I was going to show a quick demo from some of the tools that I've been using for the past few years to work with kind of data in Node. I guess the big question is why do that? There's a bunch of other stuff in Python that's great. I started a few years ago switching to just get kind of all Node.js to kind of not have to switch context so much when I was doing kind of front-end development. I thought if I could just kind of always stay in JavaScript, that would help things out a lot. And I think at the time it was pretty foolish, but now a few years later, it's starting to make more sense with a lot of other pretty great Node.js libraries for doing a lot of like geospatial analysis. So I think it's getting more and more feasible, and I've come to really like it. So I was going to show Indian Ocean and, as Ali said, some other stuff kind of that's in the doc. TK Toolkit, kind of a collection of different libraries I've written. One's called Joiner. There's another one called Tablespoon, but in doing some tests with it, I need to update one of its dependencies to work with the latest version of Node. So I'll just put a note in the doc about that. But just before we start, the two people that are here, have you done much with Node before? Because there's a few other things that I can show you as well that are kind of big reasons why I like it from a workflow standpoint.
I feel like I use npm all the time, and I use some build tools, and I'm kind of using Node in its kind of command line environment context, but I've never built like a real Node app with like an Express server or something. I've never done that.
Yeah, I do pretty much what Scott said, and I'm just starting to build. And what I'm doing is all kind of like data oriented. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's a good distinction, Scott. So I'll be showing Node purely as scripting, as opposed to using like Express or using a server for it. Yeah, this is just for kind of reading in files and things like that, which you wouldn't need like a web framework for usually. But it's also nice then if you do want something, then do it. You could obviously then put it on the web in that way. But yeah, as you were saying, Scott, like npm is really one of the reasons why I like Node a bunch. It has great dependency management, and the package JSON can help you kind of figure out your workflow and actually make these data tasks more reproducible. So if it's all right, I'll jump right in and kind of start a project. I'll kind of narrate some of the parts. So let me screen share. Cool. Okay. So here I have my Sublime open, and I've got my terminal open here. So I just made this folder called IO demo, and I preloaded it with a bunch of data files. We'll probably not use all of these, but they're all there. And so the first thing I'll do, I'll say, and then if you've used npm before, you're familiar, npm init, and that'll create a new package.json, and I'll just keep these as for now. Hit author, change the license. And so that's written out this file for us. And that's really cool, and this is really important for dependency management. So the first thing I'll do is I'll install Indian Ocean as a dependency. But you do npm install. Can you see that? Is that big enough? Here. Npm install -- save Indian Ocean. and you can see it's created our node modules folder, and it's added this new dependencies field in package.json. And this is important now because this is if someone were to kind of copy, like a colleague would copy down our work from GitHub, they could then run npm install, and they'll get all of the packages that we installed the correct version. This little like caret, that means that it will take 1.0.x essentially. So if I were to publish a new version of Indian Ocean of 1.0.4, 1.0.5, and someone were to do a fresh install of this project, they would get that most recent patch version. But if I did like 1.1, then they wouldn't get that. They would get 1.0. So there's kind of various ways you can lock it in, which is really nice. All right, so that's kind of basic package.json stuff. And so the main thing of why I made Indian Ocean was it was really annoying to write all these like parsers and formatters for reading and writing data files, which is something that we do all the time. So, and stop me if any of this needs clarification, but the way that you import packages in Node.js is you declare them as a variable. This can be whatever you want, but there's usually a convention that the package maker sets. And then you require it with the package name. And so to read in kind of a basic CSV file, I'll do read data sync. And this is in the data folder /csv/basic.csv. Our data. And then to run this file, and that prints it out as JSON. So that's super handy. And the idea of it is kind of just get all of these different data formats into JSON, and then we can do a bunch of different stuff with them. And kind of later on, I'll show you kind of why that's really interesting. But one thing that's really nice, to go back to the package.json, you saw that to run this, we did node index.js. One thing that's cool is you can put different commands in your scripts object. And a special one is start. And do put a little alias here. So now we can say npm start, and it runs that command. And that's really nice when you're sharing projects. If you have certain conventions of like, or even if you're not sharing, if you just kind of come back to a project like a month later or a few weeks later, you're like, how do I run this big routine? Because usually when I'm working with like a data project, you have like one step that's like import the data or clean the data, scrape the data, and then go to step 2 or 3 or 4. And so I list all of those steps in the scripts so that I never have to think like, all right, what was in this folder? Which one came before it? I know, like, all right, I told myself that I would put everything that needs to be understood in here, and I'll number them within there, and then you can just kind of run your own. Any questions on that, or is that kind of old hat for you all? Cool. All right, so we'll just do npm start from now on, and know that you can put your own things in here. All right, so kind of reading files, that's pretty basic. You can do CSV. It supports YAML, both YML, YAML, if you like that. That's all in there. And it has DBF support for shape files. One of the things that I like about it is it has other kind of like data writing abilities too. You could use this simply to just kind of convert from one file format to another. Out, let's say CSVs, and let's say new.csv. So we'll take our YAML data, we'll say we want to put it into, and actually let's just call this a new folder, HK. And we'll call it new CSV, and we'll take this data. Data sync, it looks to the file extension ending for what format you want to put it in. if it's one of its known formats. If it's not, it just falls back to text. But we can also pass in a few options. So here we have write to the out folder, which doesn't exist. Actually, let's put this in data first. Data, out, MHK, new, CSV. And you'll see the out folder and the MHK folder don't currently exist. But if we pass in make directories true, it'll create them, which is handy. Oops. Oh no. Where did I mess up? Oh, I should probably not. It doesn't like that file for CSV. Well, let's take CSV and convert it on. I'll look up why it doesn't like that later. All right. I'm not sure why it didn't like that YAML conversion. I'll see. Maybe it's how it parses YAML is a little bit different. But we've converted that CSV to a JSON file and written it out. And it created our intermediate directories. So any questions on that? It's still pretty basic. One of the other things that I like a lot about it is it has, this one I end up using a ton. And there's a lot of different options, so I won't show it, but where is it? Read. The reader filter functions. So if you want to look up, and this is new as of a couple weeks ago. If you want to like filter for a bunch of JSON files in directory, a bunch of CSV files, you can do that really easily. I ended up kind of writing this all the time myself. You can also kind of skip files and skip directories, which is really nice. Or one pattern that I often end up doing is you'll want to kind of read a list of directories, but in the basic Node file system package, even if you were to say like, show me all the JSON files in this folder, it would give them back to you just with the file name. So you would then need to append the full path again. So just a bunch of convenience things so that, if you read, show me all the JSON files in this directory, it could include the full file path so that you don't have to add something again once you want to open up that file. So how I've been building it is kind of, whenever I run something that's really inconvenient, I'll then think of how I can add it into the library. One thing that I wanted to show is also the append data functions. And all these, they have both synchronous and asynchronous versions, if you prefer asynchronous. So we added this JSON file. So let's say, we have some new data. And we'll use the format name, location, height. Albert and Jane. So one use case that I often have for why I like having the intermediate directories is I'll create a script, and usually the first step is like to go and scrape some data, and then the out folder doesn't exist yet because it's empty. So then the solutions, you have to put like a git ignore file in it, and it's just kind of really messy. So this kind of really helps your workflow in that you can, in your initial script, it can start with a bare repository and fill it out without any errors. And the same thing for the append data. Sometimes you might have some existing, or you want a script to run regularly and kind of just keep adding to what it did before. And there is, in the Node file system library, you can append to a file. And that works if you have like a CSV. You could kind of strip out the header and just kind of append a row, and that's not too bad. It gets a little more complicated if you have like JSON. You then have to read the file in again and then concatenate the list of objects and then write that back out. So this is kind of the idea behind the library was that kind of having to think about all those different intricacies of all the different formats can be a real pain. So it just kind of abstracts it all out for you, so you don't have to worry about what format you're writing into or reading from. It can detect what it is and then add this data to it. And so this data can be, it's JSON here, but you could read in a CSV in the same way. So this one. Yeah, and so now we have kind of our new data has been appended to that JSON. Yeah, so I've used that a lot for scrapers or things where I want to collect a bunch of stuff. I was going to show you joining data and working with DBFs. If there are any questions? Cool.
I have one quick question.
Yeah.
The one thing that it's hard for me to kind of get my head around messing with Node is the distinction between these synchronous and asynchronous functions. I mean, I get the basic concept, but like, what are some reasons one might prefer a asynchronous function for some of the ones that you've included?
Yeah, good question. For me, if it's something that I'm just running on my computer, then I pretty much keep it as synchronous because I don't like speed isn't so much of a concern. If it's something that is going to be on like a web server and I'm going to have multiple users coming in and using it, then I would want it to be asynchronous so that those operations don't block one another. Or if I'm running something that if I'm doing, there's a great geospatial library called turf.js, and that might be a little bit kind of a bit more might be like some more intensive operations. Then I would kind of want to do those at the same time, or rather, not have to wait for them all to finish before doing the next one. I could kind of save time and do them all. Then you could do that asynchronously. So those are kind of the two main things. One, like, is it going to kind of hurt the performance of the application? Like, is it a web application? Then do it asynchronously. Two, will it just be faster for me if I do all these things in parallel? And then I would do that asynchronously. And I think that's a big, and in this next step, I'll show you kind of how to deal with that asynchronous workflow better. It's a big hurdle, I think, for a lot of people getting into Node, where they think like, oh, like how do I? Because you get those like the callback hell that people talk about a lot. But I'll show you how to make that a bit better. There are also some operations, like if you want to like run something on the command line, that is generally going to be like an asynchronous function, just the way that like Node is built. And so sometimes there's like isn't a way around it, and you just kind of have to do it. So I guess that's three. One, if it's on the web, do it asynchronously. Two, if you want to save time doing it in parallel, do it asynchronously. And three, if you have to. Does that help a bit?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also didn't know that I've used turf.js with like Slippy maps and stuff, but I didn't know that it had this kind of like back-end data processing aspect too.
Yeah, it's got some great stuff. You can do like find a point along the line. Yeah, some really interesting things. Cool. All right, so I'm going to install two other libraries. One is Joiner, that's the one that I talked about, and then QAsync, which will handle that asynchronous flow problem. And you can do those two on the same line, which is nice, and then it adds it here. All right, so let's declare Joiner. Joiner is a small utility that I wrote that joins two objects. So you give it like data, two JSON objects, and you tell it what keys to join on, and it produces like a little report and tells you like where it failed and where it worked or not. And I wrote it because I was always annoyed. Like I would do like a SQL join, and then I'd be like, did it actually do what I wanted it to do? And I'd have to spend like an hour figuring it out. So this I still use to kind of see like, all right, like was it successful? Can you show me what it's doing? And so what I'll show you is there's a shapefile in here of New York City boroughs. And we'll read in, this is what the DBF is like, a terrible format. So we'll use Indian Ocean to read in the DBF, use joiner to add some new data. I added some borough nicknames that I made up. So we'll join those to the DBF and then open up the shapefile again. This is a common use case I have where it's like I have a shapefile of data, either it's like census tracts or something, and I want to then add some data to it. And if we just kind of can get that all into JSON, then we can use all of our familiar JSON manipulation tools, either like Indian Ocean or I use underscore a ton or other things, and then write that back out to DBF. All right, so first let's get the DBF. Currently I'm working on it. This is one of the situations where I haven't really found a DBF reader that works synchronously. So this is one of those functions where it just you have to go asynchronously, but it's a really good example to show how that works. So it's in data, SHP, New York boroughs, New York boroughs.dbf. And the convention in NodeJS for callbacks is always the error is the first argument, and then whatever comes next is the next one. We'll see if there's error. Okay, so this is what our DBF looks like. We've got the different boroughs, borough name, just some basic stuff. All right, and so let's get our borough nicknames. And if we just did this asynchronous data sync, where were we? Data SHP. Data SHP. Borough nicknames. You can see we were able to read it in, but this is asynchronous, so now the data is available here, and this one is synchronous, is available here. If we were to say, log data here, it would say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. There's no data variable within there. So we need to get these two functions, we need to get them to a spot where the variables are both accessible. And so that's where Mike Bostock wrote it, which is always a really good sign that it's good quality. And it's very minimalist, so it can do a lot of things if you want it to. I'm going to just condense this a lot, keep it all on one screen. How it works is it gives you a queue once you run it. You can kind of generate new ones. You would generally use it like this. You'd say var queue equals new queue, and then we would say queue.defer adds things to our queue. We give it the name of the function, and then some arguments. So that one is now taken care of. And this one we'll say we want this to be asynchronous because it's obviously it's expecting an asynchronous function. and we'll give it that. So that one's now taken care of. Now we'll say Q await comes first, and this will be call this burrows. There was an error, throw the error. Now we've got it so we can get both data sets kind of in the same space. You know, we've loaded them both in asynchronously, or rather in parallel as well, and then we've gotten to a spot here. So I think, you know, for all your kind of whenever running into that, like how do I control all these different callbacks without getting into crazy callback hell? QAsync I use pretty much for 99% of all those problems. It's really, really easy to use. One thing that I like about it also is I use it, let's say I'm reading in just like a ton of data files. Let's say I have like a folder of like 50,000 JSON files, and I'm going to read each one in and manipulate it a little bit and then write it back out. My computer often runs out of memory if I do that too much. So you can pass a number here into the queue when you create a new one. That can be 1, it can be 20, and that's kind of the amount of parallelism. So this would say do 20 at a time. And then you could kind of limit it in a way so it doesn't try and do everything all at once. Or you can do, if you want to go expressly in order, which is a really great way to kind of get more of that kind of synchronous workflow out of asynchronous functions. You can give it 1, and then it would read dbf, and then wait until that's done, and then do this one. So it's really nice in that you can both work completely asynchronously in parallel, or you can use it to give yourself back some of that synchronous workflow you might be used to. Any questions on kind of the QAsync setup or other use cases you might have had?
So when await runs, it won't return until all of the deferred queue runs, or will
Correct.
it run? Okay, run it. So it runs at the end.
Yeah, it calls this function. Yeah, another way that I often write it is something like this. You can think of it as await takes a function that it calls when it's done. If that's easier to see, or is that more confusing?
That makes more sense to me.
Okay, cool. You can also do, one of the small thing is await all, and instead of naming out all of the arguments, they would all come back as a list, and so it'd be like results 1. Okay, cool. So we've got these two things. Now let's use, we've declared joiner up here. So let's say data equals joiner.left, left join. We'll do this one, and this will be the name key. We'll come back to that. Nicknames is the other one. Key. All right, so boroughs, we want to join. Let's look at what we're joining again. We have 5 different boroughs for New York, and they all have a borough name. And our nickname file also has a borough name and then a nickname. So for convenience, I've named these the same. So this is saying, give me the one data set that you want to be on the left-hand side, and what key is the ID that you want to name it on. What's the other data set, and what is the corresponding key for that data set to join it on. Makes sense so far? We'll get rid of these. Let's see if this works. So this, I'll make this a bit bigger. So this gives us back our data, which looks like it worked, and then the report, which tells us 100% one-to-one match of 5 rows, which is cool, which means that all 5 objects in our left-hand data set had a match in the right-hand data set. If we didn't have a nickname for one of the boroughs, then it would have said, well, 4 of your 5 matches, 4 of your 5 objects in your left-hand data set found a match. All of your matches in your right-hand data set found one. So you would still know that there was kind of 100%, but you would know kind of in which direction you were missing and whether that was what you wanted or what you didn't want. All right, so now we've got this new CSV. We can use it again to write out our new DBF. So we'll say, because there's no reason why this needs to be asynchronous, we'll just say use the synchronous function, and we'll put this into data New York boroughs. We'll call it joined data.dbf. Indian Ocean looks to the dbf extension. Oh, this is one thing that I always forget. So you can see the object that joiner returns. It puts our data under the .data key as opposed to the actual file, because it gives us that report. So I always forget that. Pass it in the .data, and that is actually the data as opposed to telling us what it did as well. Okay. Now we have this DBF, which of course will look like a terrible DBF. And to test it, let's open it up. And so it's here. So let's open this up in QGIS, just the original one. This is what our shapefile was. Open the attribute table, and that's our original DBF. And let's remove it. And let's call this .old. Now this one is New York boroughs.dbf. I'll open it. And we have it with our joined nickname. So that's kind of a brief overview, but I think that's something that I often do a lot, combining things. And before I would use R because it had a really good DBF reader, but then I'd always be going to R and RStudio to get my shapefile joined, or I'd load it into CartoDB or just my local Postgres installation and do a SQL join on it. And now, those are fine to do, but if I was doing kind of all my other analysis, or I was writing JavaScript all the time, I thought, how do I just keep it all in JavaScript? And it makes a lot more sense. It's all essentially, how do we convert this format into a list of objects, and then write it back out to whatever that other service wants, is the main philosophy. And yeah, any questions on that?
That was a great use case. That's something I struggle with a lot too, is like joining stuff, and I just end up, I open up QGIS and I join with like a CSV, and it takes forever, and you're never quite sure what's actually going on. So this is definitely helpful.
Cool. Yeah, I think, and for a while in QGIS you had to have like a delimited text file plugin or something like that to read in a CSV. Yeah, and it was just tricky. I have now that, because the DBF ability in Indian Ocean was like halfway there for a long time, but I finally finished it the other week when it went to 1.0. So now I can start adding some more kind of fancier things. But similar to how in Joiner there's a GeoJSON shortcut. So if you wanted to join 2 GeoJSON files, or one GeoJSON file with some other data, it has kind of a shorthand key for that. Or in Indian Ocean, there's a shorthand if you just want to convert a DBF file to another format. you could say, all right, give me this path to a DBF and a path to a CSV, and just do a direct conversion. So if there's use cases that you have like that, or things that you end up doing all the time, let me know. Either email me or file an issue on the Indian Ocean repository. Yeah, I can start adding some kind of shorthand methods that kind of take up, so you don't have to write as much.
Awesome.
Michael, the other thing that I feel like I'm often using R or Python or some other kind of scripting language for is just the kind of basic like subsetting data, querying data, just kind of cutting it up.
Yep.
Do you have good workflows for that in Node, or like what do you like to use for that?
Yeah. So I'm just gonna get rid of some of these comments real quick, because looking at this file again, it looks really confusing. All right, that's what we did before. I think for a lot of them, you just do filters. If you had like, where's some data? A lot of that you can do for free in a lot of ways. So you could say, filter return, and you get that. Do you use underscore often?
I just started using it on client side. I know there's like it has some nice JSON querying options.
Yeah, it has some. It does. I mean, I would. And it's also it's like a living library. I mean, they're always adding new things to it, which I always thought was like, oh, this was the one thing that they made for Document Cloud, and that's it. But there's a lot of new stuff. I use a lot of the object functions. Oh, so where's Pluck? Pluck is a great. I use this a ton. And the idea behind Pluck, you can read it, but get me a list of all of these attributes in a file, and it gives you those. I would also look at the chaining syntax in underscore, and I can show you an example of this, but it lets you put together multiple underscore methods on one object. So let me show you. So let's say our data is not that interesting, so let's see if we can find something. But you do chain, pass it the data. Underscore also has a filter method, so you can do that. Let's say they pluck the name and give me a unique list. And then chain, you always have to end it with value to tell it that you're done, which is a little bit weird, but it's one of the things. And we'll give it a duplicate. So, and I'm going to comment out the await call just so that we don't get any of this stuff. Oh, what did I do wrong? Oh, I did not install underscore.
Oh.
So that does what you would expect, but that's a really handy syntax for doing some of those subsetting and querying. The one that I was going to show you, but I need to do a little bit of work on it, is a library that I made called Tablespoon, which is a SQL and a Postgres wrapper within Node.js. So you'd give it something like this. This is your data. You do create table, and then it gives you pure SQL syntax, but gives you back, keeps it all in JSON, keeps it all in Node.js. So you could use Indian Ocean to read in a data file, and then use Indian Ocean to then write out your responses. But so yeah, I've used this in the past, and it has both SQLite. You could do in-memory SQLite, so you can open up a script. I have an example. Yeah, so this doesn't need any external database. It just runs in memory SQLite. And so create a table, and then it would give you back that. So that's another option that I like to do, because sometimes like either Postgres, you just know how to do it in Postgres, and you don't want to have to do it another way, or in SQL, whatever variation, or something like that. And yeah, so I like that one. The other one I'd also look at is D3 Nest.
Right, for rolling up data.
Yeah, yeah. So I use that one a lot. Underscore also has a group by method. This one also has some other nice stuff. So I think those are the main tactics I have for subsetting and querying.
Yeah. And just so we're clear, TK is like it's a group of Indian Ocean and all these other things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and I tend to, that was the idea, and then in my own uses, I tend to just kind of use each one on their own, as opposed to like requiring TK and using it through that. But yeah, it's just essentially just like a wrapper around all of them, or not really a wrapper, but like a way to group them all together.
But one can one like install TK and engine and then just use each method or something?
Yep. Yeah, you can. How it works, I can show you. Yeah, it just grabs those functions. And actually, I haven't updated this, obviously, you can see, in a while, since last March, because I just don't use it that often. So I'm going to make this so that it more dynamically pulls. You get all the latest features of Indian Ocean. But yeah.
Cool.
Awesome. I really love that you kind of like had this problem that you initially you're like, yeah, I mean, it was kind of like lazy. I just didn't want to like switch between different languages or different frameworks. Not lazy, but it was a problem that maybe had like a solution, but you were just, you knew that you could do it all within the one and maybe like advance your knowledge on Node. Because I mean, I've been doing pretty much essentially what you've been. Like, I develop mostly in JavaScript, but I only know how to use CSV-Kit, so I'll bounce between JavaScript and Python and try to like get what I need done with whatever I can get my hands on. But yeah, I think it's definitely helpful to kind of like pursue things that keep you in an area that maybe you have like a stronger knowledge of. Makes things a little bit easier to navigate.
It's definitely made me a much better programmer, having to figure it out. And it's kind of a fun, like, Indian Ocean, like, I highly recommend like either looking at some of the issues and contributing, not for selfish reasons that it would mean make less work for me, but it's just been like a really like very defined problem set of like, how do I read in files and read out files, and like what is the best workflow for that? And it's just made me much more conscientious of how best to do that, how I might want to do that in the future, and how to just write it more efficiently.
Awesome.
Michael, do your peers use Node in their kind of daily workflows? Some,
yeah. I mainly have kind of one person who also regularly does some data stuff. I've been trying to get her to do it more and more. She is most comfortable in Ruby, and so she often has a lot of just Ruby stuff that she uses. Yeah. The answer is never as much as I want them to.
Do they think it's super weird you're doing these things in Node when it's like, for some people it still seems like Node was never meant for that?
Oh yeah. And I think especially when I started, it really didn't make much sense, because there wasn't much out there for it. And I think now it makes more and more sense, I think. And I think, here, I'll show you. I don't know if you've seen the the turf documentation recently.
No. It's been about a year
It's
since
like,
I used it.
oh, I mean, it's gotten so cool. So, I mean, these are all one, it's like you can measure all this stuff, like take a line and return a point at a specified distance along the line, which is really cool. So you have, read in a line, go 1 mile along it, and tell me the point that's returned, which is pretty neat. But what I wanted to show is, so this guy Tom McWright, who is just an amazing JavaScript developer, he has this system where I think this is called Terrarium, or he has a couple that are kind of in an ecosystem that help it work. You do // equals, and this is like a very fancy interactive console.log that takes the GeoJSON object that he's created and makes an interactive map of it and plots it along there.
That's in the console?
It's in the browser right here.
Oh,
So you can modify this. So you could say, all right, give me 2 miles, and it rewrites it right in the browser. So
that's neat.
yeah, so I think it's just this really, like, once you're writing it in JavaScript, and once that's something the browser can understand, you can start thinking of how your code can. I think this is a great example because it's documentation. It's how code is explaining how itself works in a really beautiful way that would be hard if it were in another language. You have this kind of interactive bit here. But I've been working on a project called Notebooks, which the documentation is really poor because it's not at a stable point yet. But the idea is it's kind of like IPython Notebook, but in JavaScript, so that you can have some of those kind of dynamic processes, so that you can do your data analysis in a similar way to this. And then at that point, if your data analysis leads to a map that you're going to publish, or it leads to a chart that you're going to publish, you've been writing the same code the entire time. You don't then have to say, all right, now how do I get this ggplot chart into a D3 chart? And then, the D3 thing changed. How do I do that? You're always kind of using the same tools in the same context, whether it's analysis or whether it's publishing. Just you can get more and more fluent in them. So I like that. I like that a lot. I think it's still developing. It's not totally like turnkey. I think there's a lot of interesting developments in the Node.js world and kind of how, or in the JavaScript world, of how to create modules. Rich Harris has this new thing called Rollup, and his build system Gobble and all that stuff, and it's really, really interesting. So it's by no means like a fait accompli, but it definitely opens up a ton of possibilities for how you can think about your code and what you can do with it, which is really, really cool.
Cool.
Very neat. Very neat. Awesome. Did anyone have any other questions for Michael or things to contribute? Or I think Gerald Rich wanted to be here. I don't know if he got a hold of you to tell you how much he loves Indian Ocean, but he did Data Proofer. He did like a lowdown on his Data Proofer thing last web prez, and he mentioned Indian Ocean, and I was like, oh, maybe we should get Michael on to talk about Indian Ocean. But yeah, so kudos from Gerald there. But
oh, that's super great to hear. I mean, it's like it was this thing that I made to just help myself, and the fact that other people are using it is totally insane. So that's really awesome to hear.
Yeah, the joys of GitHub, right? It's just like, I just did a thing, I made a thing, and now it's there. Boom. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, and I will mention that Michael has a cold today, and he joined us anyway, so thank you so much for that.
Anytime.
I'll also be posting his cold remedy recipe on the Slack. So, all right, guys, thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right.
Thanks, Michael.
See ya.